Hello, everyone. This is Beth Guide with Talking Purple, and today is Friday, October the 17th, and it's also the 17th day of our government shutdown. So I thought today would be as good a day as any is to start to talk about what's happening with all of this. As many of you know, the American government has been shut down. What that really means to our everyday lives, I mean, I see people driving by outside my window. The police are still patrolling the streets. Courts are still running. So things still seem to be going on and life still seems to be happening. Although every time I turn on my TV, I hear about a government shutdown. The military is still protecting us as well. So I think short of maybe going to Mount Rushmore, some delays at the airport, there's a few essential services that this is hurting. People are still going to get their Social Security checks, so there's no worries there. Um, so the IRS is shut down. That's probably a good thing for most people. So with that said, I want to kind of talk about how we got here and understand that. So first, I think we have to have a bit of a civics lesson, and the civics lesson is going to talk about the Senate and how the Senate functions and how bills work and how this gets through. So there is no 60 vote threshold in the Constitution of the United States. There is no filibuster in the Constitution of the United States. So how did we get here? And why are we having to have a supermajority to free the country from anything? So back at the founding of the country, back when they first started, they would have people just get up and talk and talk and talk until they couldn't talk anymore. And what ended up happening is they utilized this tactic and it became called the filibuster, which means you're supposed to get up there and you're supposed to speak and you're supposed to say speaking until you fall over. For those of you who understand telethons and marathons and dance-a-thons, you're supposed to get up there and just keep going. No bathroom breaks, no food breaks, no nothing until you have no more gas in your gas tank and you call it a day. In the 1900s, in 1917, this kind of got to be frustrating because they couldn't end it. So they came up with something that they called the cloture rule. And what the cloture rule was that you had to have 2/3 majority to stop debate and cut off the filibuster. Now, in the modern era, we've seen some grandstanding that people got up and read the dictionary, people have got up and read the Bible, and we see that on television now. But this cloture rule really protects against a true filibuster because you can come in with this supermajority and say, hey, this is what I want to do. Well, in 1975, 2/3 of the Senate was too high of a threshold, so they lowered it to 3/5, which is the 60 vote minimum that we see now. So basically, what the Democrats are doing right now is filibustering this continuing resolution out of the House of Representatives. So, what is a continuing resolution? That is a temporary bill that allows the government to be funded while we're going through this period of time that there's not enough funding to keep the government open, and they haven't come up with a new appropriations for it yet. So the Republicans came up with they wanted to fund the government to November the 21st, which is right before Thanksgiving. So I thought that was a little bit of an interesting timeline. And they were working on that, and they recognize, at least this is what I've understood them to say, they recognize that there's some problems here, and they have been trying to work out a solution. So what I want to talk about now is what are those actual problems and what the Democrats and why they are, and let's call it what it is. They are filibustering the federal government and they are holding the government closed as they filibuster. Okay, because they're not voting with the Republicans to break the filibuster. So we want to keep pointing fingers and pointing blame, but the end of the day is the Democrats are filibustering and they are holding up the passage of this continuing resolution. So the Republicans cannot vote on their own to break this situation. They require Democrat support, and the Democrats aren't doing it. Okay. So you can infer that and interpret that any way you want, but that's the reality of it. Filibuster, no government. So why are they doing this? There is multiple situations that they want changed, and they're utilizing this as a lever to do that. And let's talk about the first thing that's out there, which is this claim that insurance premiums are going up. Now, you got to parse words carefully, okay? Because insurance premiums may go up for 8% of the public. 90-some% of us have privatized insurance that is not dependent on a government subsidy to provide our insurance. Now, of course, some people need the subsidy, and some of us have insurance through our jobs, and that's subsidized by our employers. So everybody has some level of subsidized health care, because as an employer, I provide a certain percentage. The government is also offsetting some of the costs. So it's not like nobody's getting a subsidy. I think everybody's pretty much subsidized in some way, shape, or form, either through your employer or through the government. Now, am I a believer that the employer, this should stay on the employer's side? Yes, but I recognize that some people don't have jobs. Some people are independent contractors. There are apparatus, and until Obamacare came along, there really was no way to cover those people in a reasonable way. So if you didn't have a job, you didn't have insurance. So there are some things here that need to be considered. So before COVID, what they did was there was a 400% of the federal poverty level cap put on Obamacare. So that's a fancy way of saying the federal government has a poverty level. Let's say it's $15,000, which is approximately what it is right now for an individual. And up to 400% of that number, or about 85, well, I'd have to do the math. The 400% of that number, the reason I'm saying 85, because that's for a family of two. A family of two is $21,000 right now. And 400% of that is roughly $85,000. So this is those salary levels that we're talking. Prior to COVID coming along and the laws that were put in place with the rescue package that came in with Biden, what ended up happening was once you got over that 400%, there was a complete drop off. You were no longer subsidized. So theoretically, you could make $85,001 and you no longer were subsidized. They lifted that 400% cap during COVID to try to help people out who didn't have insurance or who lost their jobs or were in a transition because of this whole problem with COVID, and everybody had to go home, and the unemployment rate went through the roof, and we had all this go on. The other part of this was that they capped the original Obamacare, had no cap on the amount of money you could pay monthly in your premium. And as part of the Inflation Reduction Act, they put an 8.5% cap in on the amount of your out-of-pocket. So what ended up happening is that you had a fixed rate that couldn't exceed 8% of your income. So that's nice. I mean, I think my health insurance is more than 8%. And I think some people would say that their health insurance was more than 8% of their monthly income. We're not afforded that on the private sector the way they are in the government sector. So basically what it is the government is backfilling to the tune of billions of dollars subsidies for health insurance for the 8% of the folks that are in the Obamacare program. Okay, that's the first thing. Whether you agree with it or not, that's the first problem. And we can look at each of those problems individually here in a second. The other thing you hear is the Republicans are going, well, they're giving money to illegal aliens for health care. And the federal government has that prohibited. However, there's a loophole, which was written into all of this, which is on Medicaid, the state is being paid back to the tune of about $600 billion. They're being given money back. And they can then utilize that to subsidize anybody they want on Medicaid. In states like California and Illinois provide health insurance to illegal aliens. So there is a definite loophole, indirect Kevin Bacon way of providing health insurance to illegals in states that want to do that. And they're trying to get that. Now, what happened is the big, beautiful bill took out that carve out and took out that payback to the states because it was trying to close this loophole. So the Democrats want what was passed in the big, beautiful bill to be repealed. So they're trying to take out things that were already put into law and they wanted. The other thing they have problems with is they want to remove the work requirement for able-bodied people that are on Medicaid. And I might say, which I'm going to say, is that when Bill Clinton was the president, Bill Clinton actually put a work requirement on welfare payments. And if you didn't work so much, you didn't get a welfare payment. Now, what's interesting about this, our present situation is the requirement that they put, it's very interesting. It's not as bad as the Democrats want to make it sound if you actually read it and parse it out. What they're saying is that they want to require an 80-hour a week, or excuse me, a month, which is part-time work, training, or volunteering. So it's not even a work requirement. It's just requiring you do something. If you're physically able, you do something to be productive part-time, 80 hours of your time a month. Now, I think that's good citizenship, in my opinion. If we're going to include volunteerism in it, that's a lot of us go to work and we volunteer. So I don't have a problem with it. And then the other thing is nobody had a problem with it under Bill Clinton. They put it through with that. And is it an unreasonable requirement for somebody to have to at least make an attempt to contribute to the society that they're wanting to provide the benefits from? Again, this is about able-bodied people. So as much as they're complaining on the left about this, about these cuts that were made to Medicare, they didn't necessarily cut it. What they did is they put a requirement on it that you have to be a productive member of society to get some. Now, if you're not able-bodied, and I don't necessarily mean go out and be able to lift logs. I mean, that's meant if you have mental shortages, you have any type of malady about you, then you're not able-bodied. But if you have, if you're in your okay shape and you qualify, they want you to be a productive member of society. And I don't think that's an unreasonable reach in my opinion. I'm sure that some of you guys can put in the comments and put in likes and all of that give me examples that deviate from that. But when you start to open it up to work, training, or volunteering, basically don't sit home on your sofa. Is the way I take it. Go out and do something for somebody. So it's not even as strict as Clinton's was, because Clinton was you basically had to have a work requirement or a training program requirement. There wasn't the option to go volunteer. So I thought that was interesting. And then the other thing is that the requirements are the equivalent of a part-time situation. hey, maybe you have kids, and maybe taking care of kids is a reason that you have some problems. Well, go down and volunteer at their schools. Those kids should be at a school. Go down and volunteer a couple hours and help out with the school. And guess what happens? You've met your requirement because it's only part-time. They're not even having a full-time requirement. It's a part-time requirement. So those are the beefs. Okay. So we want to roll back some of the things that were put in the big, beautiful bill, which is Medicare and this provision to pay the states because it provides health care to illegals. And we want to make sure that people don't have premiums go up with Obamacare. But I've got some kind of questions on this a little bit, um, because when you start to get, and again, this is on a sliding scale based on the federal poverty level, right? So if my federal poverty level, it goes up. So by the time you get to a family of six, I think it's at 53,000. So you'd be almost up to $200,000 to be 400% of $50,000. You're starting to get some pretty big numbers put out here on the table. And the question that I have is, um, how much should you make that too much for the government to come in and subsidize? Because I hear a lot of talk about, hey, we want to tax the millionaires, and we want to tax the billionaires, and we want all this stuff. But then when I look at it, you're starting to throw out numbers that are starting to get into that ballpark. And when I remove some of these, at what point should you not qualify for a government subsidy? With your employer, you do get a subsidy, but the thing is, you're also contributing to the improvement of that person's business. And if you're not, then you probably don't have a job, rather than whether you have employment or not. So whether you have healthcare or not, and healthcare subsidies. So there's a whole lot of things to consider with this, and I'm trying to be in the middle and impartial with it. I think to cap a premium at 8% when 93% of the people's in the country do not have an 8.5% cap, I think that makes an interesting thing. So is that right? I mean, I don't know that I'm in favor of that, but I'm trying to be kind of trying to say, hey, this is what's going on. You make your own mind up in what you want. To me, it's not 8.5% cap on a premium amount when 93% of the country is not. The other thing that I see a lot of problems with is, how does the government provide a subsidy? For what is that mechanism? And they're doing that through tax dollars. They're taking money from me, they're giving it to someone else. And I mean, I don't know how you feel about that either, but I think there has been a big disassociation between the government's money and my money, and understanding that the government does not have money. If they don't take money from me, they don't have any money. If they don't take money from my business, they don't have any money. So I'm not opposed to contributing. I'm not opposed to business taxes. Income tax is a whole story on its own. We could talk about that at some point all by itself, because what is the purpose of an income tax? And the only people that have income are people that go to work and get a wage. I mean, the rich people don't even have an income. So there's like it's all investment. So there's like a whole bunch of moving parts to this that I don't think that we think about. But just understand that every time somebody is paying something with a tax dollar, something was taken out of your pocket if you're working to provide for somebody else. So what is your opinion on that, and what do you think about that? So that's that story. The next thing that I want to tackle today is my Lake Houston dredging situation. I want to kind of touch on that briefly. This is also a tale of taxation now, because the new explanation as to why we voted against the dredging bill, and why we voted basically, in essence, to what I say is flood Kingwood, um, is because there was no taxing authority written into the bill that was voted on. I'm going to kind of debunk this as we go. It kind of keeps evolving. So we're going to kind of talk about that too. So I want to explain this Lake Houston dredging bill. So our local state representative came up with a bill to create a dredging authority, which allowed there to be a government entity that oversaw dredging for the Lake Houston watershed. There's a lot of nuts and bolts to this, and we can get into this over time. I don't want to make this podcast too long today. But the reality is that you can fund this with government dollars. Remember, I just said that anytime we're funding this with public tax dollars, that means that that is coming out of my pocket, going directly into somebody else's pocket. Okay. So if you need to dredge and you're doing it with federal dollars, that means money was taken from me as a private citizen and done over to that. Our local representative, Charles Cunningham, actually came up with a way to do this by selling the aggregated material that they will be dredging out of that lake. Now, some people will go, well, maybe there's not enough money. And this material does have a lot of value to it. But what I will say is we had a secondary program here in Kingwood that had topsoil to the tune of 15 feet spread over about 200 acres. We had a program to have that dirt removed. We actually allowed the contractors, instead of us paying them to remove it, we actually had contractors come in, remove it, and we sold them the dirt. And they came in and hauled it off for free. So it became a money situation rather than a money-making situation rather than tax dollars being used to fix a problem. Okay. And I think that's a very entrepreneurial way to do it. I think it's inventive. I think it shows good stewardship of public funds and public jobs, public works that need to be done. I did do a little bit of follow-up that says what happens if the money collected is not enough to support the endeavor. And what was told to me was basically the city of Houston has the ability to add a dredging fee to the water bill because Lake Houston is the drinking water for 6 million people. So if we cannot dredge that lake effectively using the aggregated materials and selling it, the city of Houston is more than prepared to come in and take a look at what it would cost to add it. And the projection is, I said, well, it's $1. And the person I was talking to said it's probably less than 10 cents. So, the thing is, we're not talking about, and that's per month. So we're not talking about a lot of things here, but to have the attitude that I didn't vote for something because there was no taxing authority. Well, I don't think anybody would have been in favor of creating an entity to tax people more. And that's a very non-conservative viewpoint as far as I'm concerned. We would like low taxes and government funded in other ways other than tax and confiscation of personal funds. I mean, there is, taxing is, there's a lot of things tied to that. And, we threw a lot of tea in a harbor at one point over taxes and what was being charged. So, why we would be looking at it here is a little bit of an interesting story, but understand that there isn't a tax mechanism needed because the material taken out of that lake actually has value, and that is going to be utilized to basically sell the material and pay for the dredging. So it becomes a self-sustaining policy and not a drag on the city of Houston, not a drag on any other government entities. So there's that. The only other thing going on this weekend is we got no Kings again. And that's something that I keep trying to understand what everybody's protesting and what everybody's upset about. It's what I think is happening is that we all are in our siloed echo chambers and we all we talk to each other. I'm upset, you're upset. We're thinking that, we're doing right. The other side's thinking we're not doing right. Trump's an authoritarian, Trump's not an authoritarian. Where does that all come from? What is the behavior? We have had people go in to cities before to help solve problems with the National Guard. This is not the first time that's happened. Um, do we want the problem solved? Do those states want those problems solved? And do they need to? What is the obligation to the country at large to make sure that the laws of the country are enforced? And if you don't like the laws, change the laws. I am going to say one thing, and this goes across the board on everything, okay? The Democrats had control and could have permanently codified what they wanted out of Obamacare. The Democrats had all three branches of government and could have fixed the dreamer problem, okay? And the Republicans have had all three branches of government, and they could have passed the abortion laws. My opinion is, especially in the House of Representatives and maybe secondary to the Senate, they want the issue more than they want the solution. And I think as a general population, we should wake up, and that's what we should be demanding. There shouldn't be a negotiation after the fact. Years later, you knew in 2022 and 2021 that this stuff was going to expire. So rather than making it temporary and the front side, come back, make a clean bill that says, hey, this is what we want to do to Obamacare. Hey, we think the dreamers should be American citizens or have a legal status, because I actually am of one of the people that think the dreamers need a legal status. The only thing they don't need is the ability to vote. It wasn't their fault they were bought here. You can't really theoretically send them back because it'd be like sending me back to Italy. Other than spaghetti and pizza, I know very little about living in Italy. But on the other side of the coin, because the process was flawed, come up with a compromise. And to me, the compromise is have them come in, they're legalized, they can stay here legally, they're afforded all rights but the right to vote. And I think that solves it. But nobody has ever tried to come up with a dreamer bill and get it through while they've had all three branches of government. And I am convinced that the biggest problem is everybody wants the issues. They don't want the solutions. And I think we should start to move towards solutions and stop this ongoing. And I think that's what we should be demanding from our government is permanent solutions and stop this back and forth and abstract situations. And, every one of Trump's executive orders should have been backed up or should be backed up in the House of Representatives with legislation being introduced. Every one that Obama did should have been backed up with legislation. Every one that Biden did should have been backed up with legislation, and it should have gone to an up or down vote so the people actually have a say-so in what's happening in their government. As much as the left is upset by what Trump is doing, where was the other side when it came time to try to codify some of these things? So there's a whole lot of issues going on here that we need to look at. And this is partly why I'm trying to do this podcast, because I'm trying to say, look, this is where we're at. This is what the reality is. If you're good with it and this is what you want, this is how we bring about this solution. And if this is not what you want, then we need towards working towards a different solution. But things are broken right now. And then when I throw social media on top of it, and let everybody just continue to eat in their own echo chamber without looking outside of it, you have a lot of problems. And as we go on, we're gonna address those more and more. So I'm still getting my legs underneath me with this podcast. We're still just trying to get up and get going. And I'd like a tagline suggestion if anybody has any. My executive producer says I need a tagline. So my little creative brain is going to have to think of that, I think. But in the interest of all of this, I think we need to really start looking at solutions based that work for everybody or for a majority of everybody. So With that said, have a great weekend, everyone. This is Beth Guide with Talking Purple, and I'll catch you next week.